Hi, I'm Janice Switlo, and recently I did the ANGA special as an episode. Very long episode for some, and it covered in detail the ANGA. Now, I thought I would do a follow-up on that. This is going to be very brief. The only commentary that I have heard in response to that, issuing from the provincial company that is organizing and has been negotiating that agreement, is to say, well, it's fine to criticize, but what's your solution? This is the only practical thing. What else can be done? Well, again, this is going to be very brief because it's very easy to address those questions. But first I want to point out, it's been brought to my attention today that some bands are trying to use laws that they've passed, for example, an education law, and trying to say that that's a general purpose, quote-unquote, constitution for purposes of allowing that band to enter into a ratification vote on the ANGA. So check what the situation is, because under the ANGA, the steps to partake in that, the band must have passed a constitution, an actual general constitution. Its purpose basically is to hand over all your authority as the people, the members, into the hands of chief and council. That then opens the doors to allow chief and council to then issue a BCR, asking and confirming there will be a vote on the ANGA. If the band has not completed one of these general constitutions, then there's no vote. But as said, some chiefs and council have submitted to, I know of at least one example, and there apparently are more of these, have submitted a law that only deals with jurisdiction over education. So the people did not hand over general authority to chief and council, only provided them with authorities for purposes of education, and as limited to that, in that particular example, their education law. So check that out and put the Union of Ontario Indians, the provincial corporation, put them on notice if that's the situation for your band. Put your chief and council on notice. If you hear there's a vote scheduled for you, on what basis? Did you vote in a Constitution Act? If you didn't, then in writing, verbal isn't going to cut it, in writing, inform them there is no general constitution that's been passed, therefore no vote is possible on the ANGA. So, getting back to this age-old argument, do it this way, really it's the only practical thing. Well, I just want to give you the history of when that strategy was first introduced. And that's way back with Thomas Jefferson. And let me just quote, because it came into play in addressing the problem of slavery. So in the end, Jefferson could see slavery only as tragedy. He may have believed it to be a, quote, hideous blot, end of quote, as he wrote in September 1823, but it was not a blot he felt capable of erasing. The man who believed in the acquisition and wielding of power, political power, intellectual power, domestic power, and mastering life from the fundamental definition of human liberty in the modern world down to the smallest details of the wine he served and the flowers he planted, chose to consider himself powerless over the central economic and social fact of his life. And we're talking slavery. Writing to a correspondent who asked him to devise a way to free the slaves of Virginia, Jefferson demurred. Quote, "This, my dear sir," end of quote, Jefferson said, quote, "is like bidding old Priam to buckle the armor of Hector. This enterprise is for the young. It shall have all my prayers, and these are the only weapons of an old man," end of quote. Slavery was the rare subject where Jefferson's sense of realism kept him from marshaling his sense of hope in the service of the cause of reform. Quote, "There is nothing I would not sacrifice to a practicable plan of abolishing every vestige of this moral and political depravity," end of quote, he wrote in 1814. But that was not true. He was not willing to sacrifice his own way of life, though he characteristically left himself a rhetorical escape by introducing the subjective standard of practicability. So he was the first to say, I can't deal with this. There's really, if I could dream up of a practical way of doing so, I would. But that was just a way to ignore the issue, because it would have affected his economics and those of his supporters, basically the white population. So don't fall for this excuse that you have to do it this way, you have to become incorporated, there is no other practical way. Let me share with you a very simple and easy practical way that you can address what appears to have driven this ANGA. And I want to make the point that just because those who have negotiated it, and they talk about doing this for 25, 30 years, just because they can't see the way to do things does not mean they cannot be done. And with the greatest of respect, it may well be time for them to step aside and allow the youth that Thomas Jefferson, for example, said, I don't have the ability here. I'm gonna leave this to the youth to deal with. So I'm speaking to the youth and the younger nationals, Anishinabek nationals, and say, think about this. Why are you looking at what Canada wants you to do? Why not act as other countries and nations do? China doesn't go to Russia and ask Russia to incorporate China for China to be able to engage in economic sovereignty and aspects of relations with other countries. It's just a ridiculous notion. Indigenous nations have not capitulated. They're being very aggressively approached and saying, here's a pot of money for now. And individuals, 25 years of pulling in a paycheck to do this. And you know how I feel about the quality of this agreement. But apart from that, here's how it's done. Now I don't like to dictate a solution. I like to help and be part of a circle that comes to a decision. And I have a whole lot of expertise and advice and information and examples that can be shared in that circle. But I really do want to address this because it seems to be the only response to the, an hour of my assessment and the many other people who have said this is a bad deal, don't do it. Here it is, right? It's called a sovereign wealth fund, a sovereignty wealth fund. If this is all about getting a combined transfer of monies from the Canadian governments and putting it someplace where it can be dealt with, because Canada can't just hand it to individuals, well, then you set up a sovereignty wealth fund. This is also the fund where companies wanting to engage in business on your land, and I'm not talking on reserve land here, I'm talking your broad, country. This is also where they can deposit funds, and it's not seen as, you're just, this is blackmail. No, this is legitimate. If you want to do a deal, here's how we structure it, and here's where the money goes. And that sovereignty wealth fund is not in the hands of a couple of people who can use that money and do whatever they want with it and cut out chiefs, etc., as this ANGA is structured to permit. Okay, it may start out looking one way, but it's sure as heck not going to end up that way. You give unfettered power to a few people and darn tootin', they're going to exercise that power, right? So you set up a sovereignty wealth fund. You have indeed, if it is a concept of every chief from a community participating in decision making, well, then you structure that such that they continue to have that decision making as directed by the people. But forget about forcing the people to sign off and hand over all their authorities to chief and council. The people retain their rights. I would recommend that's an important check and balance. The structure and why you're here today is because you did not have one king that would sign things away. You would have the benefit of input and decision-making conducted from bringing together all of the expertise, all of the experience, all of the guidance and direction that comes with that. And it's quite simple. And then when you're structuring and saying, okay, we want to do something together in terms of restructuring education, restructuring health, things like this, again, or dealing with a company, for example, you use the model that I recommended in British Columbia for hereditary chiefs. You use a limited liability partnership. You don't lose all the tax advantages that you have that you're going to lose by incorporating under, under provincial and federal laws. There are ways to structure it that not only preserves who you are, but starts to draw the correct picture to the world as to who you are. Not Section 35 crap in these agreements. No need for 25 years of negotiations. I mean, that was just setting evidence and distracting you and preventing you from doing the work you needed to do. It's really simple. You need, however, people who see you, actually believe and see that you are nations. You're not just remnants, and that the doctrine of discovery is not good law. And it does not apply to you. You need proper financial people with experience, not just a relative with all due respect, right? You need to hire the best. You need the best lawyers. Please do not use the lawyers that were involved in drafting the ANGA. They've already demonstrated an inability to ensure, for example, the simplest standards of making sure you're getting the deal that you want to get. That's evidence right there that they're not equipped to do this kind of work. So you structure it, you set it up, you get the expertise, the money gets properly dealt with, it gets properly invested. None of these other situations where one chief or a couple of people decide, oh, I'm going to invest in this thing. How many times have we seen people take advantage and specifically target Indigenous nationals because they're aware they may not have the depth of experience with modern day business that others have. We need to improve that. We need to get that up to speed. And yes, it's going to involve hiring the best. And if some of your people do indeed carry those qualifications, by all means, you're going to make sure that the location of where the trust is set up is in a tax-friendly environment, either offshore or in a bank on reserve. Different ways, again, different ways to do this, but it's straightforward. You inform Canada once you're properly structured, hey, we're set up and we're ready to receive a transfer payment from you regarding this issue, and we want it together, and we're going to decide, all of us together under the structure that you set up, and the checks and balances on your assets, the checks and balances on the exercise of your powers. No one can take that away. Going under this ANGA, when you realize, if that gets put in place, when you realize what is done and can be done and will be done under that, you'll have no place to turn because you'll have signed off on that. So again, my strongest recommendation, you deserve more. There are ways, easy ways, that don't cost a lot of money, don't cost 25 years of however many paychecks that adds up to. And you will provide for future generations that way. So I encourage you, I remind you, there are ways, there are people who can help you, people who don't have a vested interest, people who will not be able to convert collective assets. They remain your responsibility. And I encourage you to understand that. Please do not believe the rather pathetic efforts to say to you, this is all we can do. That's not true. You deserve better. You can do better. You do not have to fall victim to the Indian agent mentality of telling you what to do. And that's all I have to say.